Hi, this is Jason Martell with Ancient Explorers. Hopefully by now you've had a chance to watch the Dwarka documentary, and now we want to put into perspective how Dwarka fits in to the overall view of the Ancient Explorers platform. By becoming a member of Ancient Explorers, we're going to go around the world firsthand and investigate locations, just like we did with Dwarka. But of course, we want you to come along for the ride. So in today's bonus video, we're just going to touch on some of the topics, locations, artifacts, things of interest that we cover under the premium membership of Ancient Explorers. So let's just go ahead and dive right into this bonus lesson and look at some of the content and topics that we like to cover. Now obviously, as I just mentioned, Dwarka is the first location where we went on location with Amish Shah and investigated this possible cover-up. Dwarka is going to be an ongoing investigation. We know that there's an underwater city right off the coast of Dwarka, possibly two Manhattan-sized continents of a city, right off the coast there that does merit further study. Depending on who we can partner with and the type of technology that we'll have access to, we're definitely going to come back to the topic of Dwarka. But I at least want to show you some of the other areas and things of interest under Ancient Explorers premium platform. Ancient technology, of course, is one of the topics that is of great interest. We're starting to find pieces of technology, evidence, that push the needle back in our human origins and really kind of raise your eyebrows in trying to figure out how these things could exist. One of those is the Antikythera mechanism. Now we know that under radar, this device has between 35 and 70 interconnected cogs and wheels. It's more complicated than a modern day Swiss watch, yet it's over 2,000 years old. Now we found it off the coast of Antikythera, and as I mentioned, you can see that there is a clear mechanical device being shown here. And they theorized that the Antikythera mechanism had two purposes. And again, we're talking about a device that's 2,000 years old. So trying to pinpoint who actually built it, it might have been one of the great Greek mathematicians or inventors like Archimedes. We don't really know. But we do know that the Antikythera mechanism was used for two purposes. One, it was an astronomical device. By using it as a ship captain, for an example, you could chart your way through the sea by tuning it to a specific planet or a star and navigating a course, and it would actually know how to make the calculations and adjust for the course correction. It was also an astrological device. So if I knew your date of birth, I could tell you, well, on this specific day, Mars and Jupiter align, and these certain things are going to happen to you. So it was used as an astronomical device for navigation and also as an astrological device for more esoteric information. Very interesting to come out of our history of a device that's 2,000 years old. Now, another area of great interest, which is, of course, under ongoing investigation, is in Egypt. What we have appears to be evidence of ancient electricity. There's an area in Egypt called Dendera. And in one of the crypts of Dendera, it's literally known as the light-giving source. There are walls inscribed with information and hieroglyphics showing these reliefs of what appear to be a large light bulb. Literally a light bulb with a filament plugged into an actual power transistor. And if you look at these, this looks very similar to a modern-day power transistor. Now, modern Egyptologists would look at this and say, well, this is just the lotus flower. And what we see here is not a filament, but the aroma of the lotus flower. Okay? An alternative view is that they're actually utilizing electricity. Now, if you go into any of these tombs or recesses or crypts, there's no evidence of flame. How did they inscribe the walls with hieroglyphics and wall carvings so intricate like you see here, without no evidence of flame, no evidence of soot on the ceilings? The only other theory through mainstream science is using copper mirrors to reflect the light down into these tombs and recesses of tunnels. That simply doesn't hold up. The alternative view is exactly what they're showing us. They were using electricity. They even had a power source. So we're talking around 2500 BC for the Egyptian culture. And in that same time frame of the Egyptians what appear to be using light bulbs, and here is an actual version that I tested and built on camera. If you think about the term of using swamp gas, there were misreported or misidentified UFO sightings where swamp gas, methane and the gas of the swamp just naturally coming out of the swamp, and then a spark of light or heat would ignite it and make phosphorescence. So it's very possible just through natural means the Egyptians could harness natural methane gas from a swamp or some natural chasm and introduce it to a low energy source, possibly from something like this, a Baghdad battery. In the same time frame of 2500 BC, not only do we see the Egyptians possibly utilizing electricity, but we actually find power sources being used in ancient Iraq in that same time frame of 2500 BC. We found about a dozen of these, and the Baghdad battery, now I've been able to test this on camera with my own version, and what's really interesting about the Baghdad battery is for a version that's about, let's say 6 inches tall, we can generate around 4 volts. Now 4 volts is comparable or close to a 9-volt battery, what we would use to power a modern day flashlight. So if you figure some of these jars being depicted in Egypt being 6 feet tall, not 6 inches, imagine the type of electricity those might be able to generate, possibly enough to harness a very large light bulb. As far-fetched as that sounds, that's what the evidence is pointing towards. Now, other areas outside of just artifacts and technological pieces that stand out are unexplainable feats of engineering, where we see edifices being built out of megalithic stones where there's no mortar being used to fit the stones perfectly together. It's almost as if most of these stones have been exposed to a high level of heat, a term called vitrification. And then the stones would be easily fit together in a molten lava-like state. They're kind of like putty. Very easily they fit together and then they harden back into stone. So at a lot of these sites like Teotihuacan or Tiwanaku, Pumapunku, we see these megalithic structures, but in an amazing articulate detail in the architecture. The ability to carve out some of these stones. Now, Pumapunku is a great example. We see some of these stones that appear to have laser-like precision, cuts that are almost like Lego blocks to fit together, carved out areas where molten metals seem to have been poured to harness these stones together. And again, you can see these holes here under magnification are like perfectly diamond-tipped drills would be needed to use this to cut the stone itself, granite, diorite, but not if it's under vitrification. If you heat the stone to a lava-like magma state, then it's like putty, and it would be very easy to poke a whole bunch of holes through it at a symmetrical lineage. So this is definitely another question we have to answer. How was ancient man able to heat stones to a magma-like state? And we see this all over ancient Peru, South America, sites like Sacsayhuaman, Machu Picchu, and Pumapunku. Now, combine this vitrification, heating of stones to a magma state, with megalithic stones, on top of them being able to cut out perfect shapes and fit them together. They were somehow able to lift stones that are trilithotons. They weigh hundreds of tons. We see that these stones were found in an area near Baalbek in Lebanon. The quarry site was 5 miles away, but then carried or transported somehow to Baalbek and stacked perfectly, making the Wailing Wall and various other sites that we have around the world. They're made up by these megalithic trilithoton stones, and you can see people actually standing on these stones for reference. These were this is a stone that broke off, and so they left it at the quarry site. Now, again, megalithic structures all over the earth, just like we have in Giza, we have structures that not only are large in scale, but also in stature. They somehow have been built to align to points in space. And these alignments take place thousands of years ago. We can use star charting software and constellation mapping programs that you can run on your iPad or your computer, tell you where the stars are going to be ahead of you, above you tonight, in the future, or also in the past. And it turns out by running this model in 10,500 BC, what we have at Giza is the three pyramids are forming a terrestrial map of the Orion constellation. Coincidentally, the Sphinx is also looking east directly into the constellation of Leo. But this is at 10,500 BC, not at 2,500 BC as mainstream science says the Egyptian culture has existed. So what we are seeing is scientific proof that's pushing the needle back in our human origins. If the Egyptian culture did exist at 2,500 BC, why did they build monuments that align 8,000 years in their past to 10,500 BC? Maybe they were actually around a lot longer than we think, or there's a lost cycle of time as to why they would point their attention in the past to say when they were at their highest peak of a civilization. Now, this is a very interesting point that we're going to cover under the Ancient Explorers platform. All around the world, there are megalithic sites that have been used for high astronomy, accurate observations of the sky over thousands of years passed down as sacred information. Where are they in this precession of the equinox? Right now we're in the age of Pisces. In about 150 years we're going to go into something called the age of Aquarius. People have heard of the Dark Ages and the Golden Age. All of this information is tied into an intricate lost cycle of time that the ancients were well aware of, and built monuments specifically dedicated to alignments or being able to observe these movements in the heavens. Now, as we move away from just mainstream science understandings and views of our history, we're also starting to see that, well, there are pieces of information that come out of our more biblical and sometimes mythological tales that seem to be based on fact and not myth. Were we visited by ancient gods? We still don't know. But there seems to be clear evidence that all the great ancient cultures were visited by higher beings. These beings flew in craft, had technology that ancient man didn't understand. This monastery in Yugoslavia is a great example. We see this fresco of a Jesus crucifixion, but as a backdrop, there are flying machines. This fresco is very old, coming from ancient Yugoslavia. And as you can see here, there are ancient UFOs being depicted in this biblical art. And this is a common theme that we see over and over again, is these ancient depictions of flight that ancient man was observing. So these depictions of ancient flight really do merit further investigation. You can see that he's turning his head and he's almost looks like he's manipulating controls. So we have many depictions coming out of Renaissance artwork that depict not only biblical scenes, but subtle nuances of information that the artist chose to include. You can see in this famous scene of the Madonna, painted by the St. Giovanni artist, the Madonna is clearly depicted here, but as we zoom in the backdrop, you can see that there appears to be a man and a dog looking at something in the sky. If we zoom in even closer, what we see are details here that really just defy coincidence. The gentleman and the dog are clearly looking up at a luminous object. The rays are emanating light, energy, and that's exactly what we see in any modern day UFO sighting. Our technology isn't advanced enough yet, even today, that anytime we film some type of craft in our atmosphere that's being powered by some foreign energy source, any type of high energy source in our atmosphere, mainly nitrogen, it's going to create luminescence. The outpouring is going to be phosphorescence, photons. So that's exactly what we see in modern UFOs, is you try and zoom in on it, it's just a big glowing ball of light. Well, that's exactly what ancient man was seeing as well. These craft being flown around with an intelligent presence. Now, all the way up through the Renaissance art, there are terms of flying shields. They were attacked by flying shields in the sky. So we really have to wonder about this extraterrestrial connection. Are there beings visiting us, probably not only from other dimensions and other universes? This is a hard thing to answer, but as we look at this lost cycle of time, it seems that as when we're in the golden age, these interaction with higher beings is a commonality. But then we go into the dark ages, like HBO's Game of Thrones, and we forget all of these sacred interactions. We're just now starting to relearn this information. Now, it appears that most of these ancient cultures also depicted non-human beings. There are several figurines that come out of ancient Iraq, Sumer, where they depict these beings, helpers of the gods. They flew their craft, they helped with medical experiments, but they were clearly not human. And even other cultures like Egyptian and Mayan seem to have similar descriptions of these gray aliens, potentially. If we look at some of the similarities of these figurines found in ancient Iraq to modern day UFOs and aliens, there is some type of connection with their craft and the beings, whether it be a flying disc in the sky or these similar, like skindly typed beings with large heads and bulbous eyes. We actually find Sumerian depictions of these figurines and texts explaining their interactions as they were helpers of the gods. Now, all throughout time in the Christian era, we have the angels, but we also have the watchers and the Nephilim. So there are many descriptions of beings that were outside of just God and man that we have to explore further. We'll just have to see how the alien topic unfolds as we investigate, further areas that cultures around the world interwove this information into their, what we now call mythology, but might be factology as we explore it more. Now I'm going to go through a few other topics, but as you can see in this bonus video, there are hundreds of topics that we're going to explore under the premium area of ancient explorers. So I want to go through just a few more of these and wrap it up, but I hope that you can see that there's a vast amount of information outside of mainstream science that we definitely should be exploring. And one of those obviously relates to some of the interpretations of our origins. There are actual lost maps that have been found that show North and South Pole, all of the continents accurately, the topography of the shorelines, even the types of animals and life that were living in these various places. And this is well before any type of flight. There were no hot air balloons, no glider planes, nothing to give man the perspective to have an aerial view to see the coastlines. Now, what's even more anomalous is they've got maps like the Phineas map that not only show the topography accurately, but it shows the topography of land masses underneath at least a mile of ice at our north and south poles. Folks, this is just simply not possible without the aid of technology. These maps were either lost knowledge that was handed down to the ancients, or again, somebody who had the power to fly at that time was working with our ancients to give them this knowledge. There's no way that we can have maps that show the topography of the land masses from thousands of years ago when there was no angle to look down on the continents. So a lot of this really needs to be explored further. And when we hear things like the Bible and the biblical flood, we have to understand that some of this information is based on fact. In the British Museum, there's an actual tablet called the Flood Tablet. Now, it's not written in English or in Hebrew. It's written in this ancient Akkadian language. And there are even previous versions in Sumerian that are thousands of years before the Christian version of Noah and a great flood. There is actually a Sumerian man who is told by an Anunnaki, a Sumerian god, to build a large craft because there's going to be a flood. But this is a much longer tale explained in this Sumerian epic called the Enuma Elish. And it talks about an ancient planet, Nibiru, Planet X. Possibly gods, these Anunnaki, come from this planet and are tied to this story, this great epic of a flood, the 7 days of creation. A much more expanded version on the original stone version told in Sumer originally, Sumerian cuneiform script. So very interesting when we challenge some of the traditional biblical information by looking at it with a scientific eye. Even these stories of there were once giants upon the earth. Again, the Sumerians clearly described a time when they were living in that epoch and described the Anunnaki as being much larger in stature and great leaders of information, a spacefaring race of beings that they looked to as gods that possibly genetically intervened to create us in their image and after their likeness. So I'm going to go ahead and end it there. But as you'll see under Ancient Explorers, we're stepping outside the mainstream track and exploring new information to discover where we really come from. Stay tuned.